Today we are joined by Nancy Ridenour, one of my favorite people. She is a CPA and has been in public accounting for over 30 years. She has had extensive involvement with nonprofits in the area, doing auditing and serving on boards. She is currently serving as the Chief Compliance Officer at Habitat for Humanity, Tampa Bay, Gulfside. Hope I got all that. And she has raised 3 beautiful daughters. Welcome, Nancy. We're so glad to have you.
And I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
So what led you into accounting? How did you get there?
Survival. I was a music major, piano, and got to college and realized I was a hard worker and not very talented. So I said, what does hard work equate to? And accounting and finance. And so I switched majors. I was a stay-at-home mom for 13 years. And when I went through a divorce, went back to school and did the 5th year of accounting and got my CPA license because I felt like a license was security in helping to raise my daughters.
So do you still play the piano, Nancy?
No.
No.
I gave it away to a young family about 5 years ago. Yeah.
She plays the keys, the typing keys.
Yeah. And I don't have any issues with carpal tunnel because I learned how to hold my wrist. Yes.
So you've worked with a number of nonprofit organizations, and from auditing standpoint, as a board member, any unique insights from those experiences or something that stands out that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I think over the years I had various sizes that were my audit clients. The small ones always touch my heart because you see a very grassroots mission and you see a board that is passionate about that mission, and helping those nonprofits grow, survive, and thrive was something that was very special to me. And I still keep my hands in on the audit side. PDR, my former firm, has me do quality control reviews on a lot of those nonprofits that were my clients. And I do love that.
And I worked for a nonprofit that you were their client, so I got to be part of that.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I took them all personally, and it made it a fun and very rewarding career.
So one thing that I know about you, when I first met you, actually, I want to say, was when you reviewed for the Junior League, when I was on their board, our 990. And what you did was you broke it down and made it easy for all of us who had never looked at a 990 before, made it easy for us to understand. So talk to us about the Form 990. What is it?
Well, I think what happened for me is, and I'm a historian by nature, but I like to talk about the evolution of governance. And Sarbanes-Oxley, which happened in 2000, was the result of incredible corporate and accounting scandals. And the accounting profession was complicit in that. People were cooking the books, Enron, WorldCom, that sort of thing. And the accounting profession came back. Sarbanes-Oxley was initiated to get corporations on the right track, and they talked about corporate responsibility, and that trickled down to those charged with governance, which in a corporation, we know who that is in a publicly traded corporation, but it trickled down to the nonprofits as well. And what we saw, that was 2000, and the auditing profession said, okay, you now have to talk to those charged with governance. And, CPAs talking to people, what? CPAs typically don't have personalities, but the audit profession did. And we said, well, we can do that. And that's when I started meeting with nonprofit boards and finding out just how critical their role was and just how little they knew. Fast forward to 2008, the IRS came out with the new 990, hadn't been updated in 30 years. And there was so much information in there. 75% of that return revolves around information, not numbers. And so in our firm, we said, hey, we don't need the tax department doing this. The audit area of the company has to be doing that when they're doing the audit. And that's how we really got to know how critical and important the 990 was, because the IRS said accountability and transparency lead to tax compliance. Mm-hmm. And so that just kind of evolved into, it became just something I became passionate about. And it's actually a very interesting form. So that's kind of the background of how I got into it. And then I started teaching at Nonprofit Leadership Center and teaching what they called Get On Board. which was a class for people that are on a board and want to learn more about governance. And part of that aspect was the 990. So just kind of became interested in sharing with people how easy it can be to understand it.
And so for donors who are unfamiliar, the 990 is a form that every nonprofit is required to file with the IRS?
Basically, yes. There are levels. There is a postcard filing that is for nonprofits that have less than $50,000 in revenue, generally speaking. I really encourage them to do that only in the beginning and move up to that 990 EZ, which is under 200,000 in revenue. 200,000 and over, it's the full-blown 990. And as soon as you start doing those two, you're exposed to being on public sites such as Candid and ProPublica and Charity Navigator when you get to that higher level. And that becomes very important for the nonprofits to understand. That's the transparency part of accountability and transparency. People want to know what you're doing.
So one of my favorite things is that I can pull up a 990 from any organization and find all the key information I need.
Absolutely. Yes. And board members need to realize their name's on there on page 7. And so you better know what's on there.
Yes.
Because people are going to call you and ask when they find out you're on the board.
So, and I think some nonprofits, I think more and more, and we'll talk about some of this today, understand the value of the 990 and what it can do for the organization and where it's found. But who looks at the 990? And so organizations and others can start thinking about who's looking at their data. Who looks at that?
I would say everybody. Everybody has the opportunity because it's on those public websites, but also best practices has that you put it on your website along with the financial statement audit, which we can talk about that later. But an answer to who looks at it, everybody. Everybody has that potential and opportunity to look at it.
And where are some sites some people can, if they wanted to look it up?
They can go to Candid, which used to be GuideStar, and look it up for free. You can go to, I like ProPublica because I think they do a nice job of showing the data and then giving more context to it in a kind of non-threatening way. They're not quite so measurable as Candid is.
Right.
And then, of course, Charity Navigator is the most famous of all of the nonprofit governance or watchdogs, we call them. You can look there as well.
It's one of the first documents when we have a new organization approach the foundation, and I just want a snapshot of what's going on. It's one of the first documents that we look at. And usually ProPublica is the site because I can put in an organization name and then 990 into Google and poof, that's usually one of the first one that pops up. That pops up. So.
And I like to go to their website, the organization's website, because I can learn a little more about their mission. I can basically see, they'll usually have a bio, again, best practices to have a bio of the board members, to see if I know anybody, because I will definitely call a board member that I know and question if I'm thinking of becoming a donor. And that's why it's so imperative for the board members to look at their, not only look at it, but try and understand key aspects of it, because donors are definitely looking at it.
And your website should be on your 990.
Yes.
There is a space for that on the 990. So if people are looking to find more information about an organization, that should be right up there, up top.
Right, and as long as a 990 is electronically filed with the IRS, that's how it shows up on these websites.
Yes.
And they are required, since the new 990, they are required to be electronically filed.
Right. So let's start digging into the 990, and I think we can start with sort of the top 10 significant items that you might look at when you're looking at the 990. As a board member, as someone completing it, let's go through that.
A board member and a donor, in my opinion, and I developed these top 10 because I thought, you know, many 990s are 50, 60, 70 pages long, and that's overwhelming. But if you can say, okay, what are 10 things I want to look at in this massive document, maybe I can understand it better. And basically, a large part of it is on page 1. So I'm going to start with page 1. The number 1 is identity and tax status. We want to know who they are, what their address is, what their website is. Are they 501c3, which is a nonprofit that takes donations? Are they a C6, which is a membership organization? And I kind of want to know when they were formed. That's all real interesting. It's in the top, very top part, the heading of page 1. So that's something that's really good to look at. Also on the far left of that top section tells you if they're new, if it's an initial return, if it's a final return. I like to look there because sometimes you look at the data and you're like, well, what's going on here? Are they closing down? Well, if it's a final return, there's a box there that you would check that would show you that as well. So that's my number one thing you should be looking at. And then number 2, which is also on page 1, is how much did the organization receive in revenue? And what I like about page 1 is contributions and expenses are summarized in a comparative way. You have prior year and current year. Numbers are really only good and valuable if you have something to compare it to. And that's what I like about page 1. Because
year over year.
When you look at revenue over expenses, it's in the detail, it's not year over year. The balance sheet is, but the revenue and expenses is not.
So if an organization has a drastic change year over year, that kind of says something more significant has happened. They've either had to spend a lot of money on something or they received a significant donation. Maybe they had a capital campaign.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they have the ability, the nonprofit has the ability to go to Schedule O and explain. They could say the reason our revenue went up or down was because, and now many people don't get to Schedule O because they go in A, B, C, D order and think about, oh, it's going to be way at the back. But it is important to tell your story in a meaningful way. And then expenses, number 3, how did the organization's total expenses break down? We have one format here that shows you what salaries were, what grants to other organizations might have been. And then I also like to refer people to page 10, which is where you see the breakdown by program, management in general, and fundraising expenses. That's a very important piece.
And how important is that?
Well, it's very important. Over the years, Charity Navigator, what I call our number 1 watchdog organization, back in 2000, said that 75% program, that a charity that is well run will spend at least 75% of their expenses on program. So that kind of has become the benchmark, which isn't necessarily true. I know in the case of Habitat for Humanity, we're about 95% is program. And let's face it, that data is an estimate. It's what we call in the accounting world an estimate, which everybody uses estimates. Depreciation expense is an estimate. On that program, what they're looking for is a consistent application of that estimate. Are you basing it on hours of employees? How are you basing that? But to me, a best practice is to say you would expect a good nonprofit to spend about 75 cents of every dollar on program. So that's important. And then at the bottom of page 1, you have net assets, which is assets minus liabilities equals that net equity or net assets is the term used in a nonprofit. And that you want to see as a positive number because that is the accumulation of wealth over the life of the nonprofit. And now we finally get to move to page 2, which number 5.
Page 1.
There is so much on page 1, and I like to look at the signature of the officer. I want to know what firm prepared it. I am nosy. That's what makes a good auditor. I'm very nosy. And if it's someone that I know, how do they do it? Another thing I like to look at on a 990 is the CPA firms that prepare these have the ability to be either all caps or not all caps. And I don't like to be yelled at, and I think all caps looks like you're being yelled at. So I like to ask firms to please turn off the all caps, because a 1040 and a corporate return does have all caps, but you can turn it off on that software. There are capabilities
So we can always tell when you've done a 990 because then it's not all caps.
It's not all caps, yeah, but I see more and more firms do that as well.
Good.
But page 2 is the part where everyone that touted the new 990 said, hey, you have an opportunity to tell your story. And that totally happens on page 2. And page 2 You have the mission statement of the organization. You also see that in the summary of page 1. So I encourage people to come up with something a little different on page 2. You might have an impact statement that is profound, put something like that on page 2. And then you have the opportunity to talk about your 3 largest programs. And they want to know what you've spent on those programs with each of those. So this is where, when the 990 first came out, the marketing and development people spent weeks and weeks and weeks developing what that's going to look like on that page. So see, we have covered 5 items, and we're only on page 2.
So when somebody's looking at the different programs, I mean, it breaks down how much money they spent on each, and then what else can we get from here? I mean,
well, you can get how well do they write? Does it make sense? Does it make you want to donate to them? I think for a donor that's looking at why would I give to this organization, page 2 is a great resource to talk about how they're making their mission happen.
And there's really nothing wrong with an organization if they don't use all the space and don't cite 3 different programs. They may really be a singular program nonprofit. And so if it's all contained in one program that the nonprofit runs, that's perfectly fine.
Well, and I think there's a term used in the industry called mission creep. And when you have too many things you're doing, there's a lack of focus. And I love an organization that has one mission. I think that's great.
I do too. I do think this is a great opportunity to really explain what it is you're doing and the impact you're having on the community. And I love it when organizations at least put some effort into what's written there.
Yes, and it's amazing. Many of them don't change it from year to year. I like when they change it up and give us new information.
Right. And that's, I think, something for nonprofits to think about too, is that you might not be prompted by the firm that you work with to update narrative. Some of them do that or ask you, is there anything that you'd like to change or update? But there's nothing wrong with telling the firm, we're going to update the information that's in there. Here's the narrative that we would like you to include.
I say it's a green flag when
it changes, and I think it's good. And the core programs may not change, but how you did them or lessons learned,
outcomes,
number of people served, the outcomes of the program should change year to year.
Well, and the software and the way the audit firms, present the data for the tax return, they can give you, here's what you did last year in a readable format, a Word format, update it and give it back to us.
Yes.
Is that best practices for a CPA to do when preparing a 990?
To tell them to update it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it is, yeah.
Good.
You can separate the good ones from the not so good ones by how seriously they take that.
Yes.
All right. Number 6.
Okay, we're moving on to page 3. And what we have, the next several items and several pages, are just a series of yes and no questions. And this one is required schedules. So every time you hit yes on this particular schedule, it generates a new form that is supplied with the 990
at the end.
At the end, yeah, they start tacking them on to the end.
Yes.
So it's important I think one of the things that's important is I always look at consistency from year to year. What did the organization do last year? If I'm on the board or like Habitat's 990, if these changed, I want to know why they changed. So it does generate other schedules that get attached. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit on some of the other important ones. Some of them aren't that important, but some of them really are.
Yes.
Okay, number 7.
Number 7 is what other IRS filings and tax compliance are required of the organization? And that's part 5. The IRS uses Roman numerals, and they don't teach Roman numerals in school anymore.
Part V for all of our Gen Zs.
Part 1V, part 4 on page 4. I love when the pages coincide with it as well, which it does at first. Part 5 on page 5 is other IRS filings and tax compliance. They want to know how many W-2s you filed, how many 1099s you filed. And then we have a series of questions that generate what other forms are being required by the IRS. And I think this is the section that has the information on whether you have income from
Yep. Did the organization receive any payments for indoor tanning services?
Yes.
Very important.
Yes, yes. When Obamacare first came out, for some reason that became a tax incentive for people. So there were some nonprofits that were having tanning beds and not paying tax on that. So I've never seen it answered yes. I would love to, but haven't seen that yet.
Live for that day.
Yeah, live for that day. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, moving on to number 8 is part 6, page 6. And this is the really important section that is governance, management, and disclosure. And this to me is a critical page. And some of these questions generate ratings in Charity Navigator because it's dealing with transparency and accountability. And so I think it's very important. I've heard of organizations that have checked no on something that they really did that was keeping them from being a 4-star charity. So as a board member, you need to be aware of what are the important questions on here and how your organization is answering them.
Okay, so what is on specifically looking at this?
At the start, under governing body and management, they want to know if key employees and officers, directors, and key employees had relationships with other officers, directors, and key employees.
And that's not good, right?
Well, I think
at least it should be noted.
It should be noted, and it would move to Schedule L if you did have it, which Schedule L is my favorite schedule in all of the 990 because it's all these independents and questionable actions that, as a board member, you need to know, because if somebody gets back that far on the 990, they're going to want to know why you had a loan to an officer, why the CEO was related to the CFO or whatever. So it's not so much that you can't have them as you need to be educated as to why you do have them. And I like that. I think that's important. It also gets into governing decisions. It wants to know if you're keeping minutes of your board meetings and your committee meetings, and they call it contemporaneously documenting, and the IRS defines contemporaneous as by the next meeting or within 60 days. So if you're not having regular meetings, you need to do it by 60 days, but are you presenting minutes at the next meeting? And I remember as an auditor, we'd look at all the board minutes and committee minutes. This was way years ago, but had a couple organizations that be like, yeah, I'll get those to you later. And you knew they were just writing away somewhere in a corner, that they were not contemporaneously documenting.
But minutes are important. It shows the history. So when someone joins the organization, years down the line, they can see what happened. When was this implemented and why?
Right, exactly. And you find critical decisions are being made, and those minutes need to document it. And now with AI, if you're on Zoom or Teams, they'll do the minutes for you. You just press a button, and better make sure that you check.
Let's start that, Duggan.
No, we're not doing that. Our minutes are documented contemporaneously.
Are you a baby boomer?
No, but I do. I was going to say, I have some concern about, I like the boardroom to be transparent. And I do have concerns that if something is listening or recording and people want to have an open and transparent conversation as a board, that they may be less apt to be transparent if they know some recording is going on that's going to take down every single word that they're saying.
Good, really valid point. I didn't think of it that way. And in the state of Florida, you have to have permission to record a two-way conversation. It can't be...
Oh, do we have your permission to record this today?
Yes. Yes. Okay. But many people don't realize that. You're breaking the law if you're secretly recording a meeting on, and that's why Zoom and Teams notifies.
Yes.
It says you are being recorded.
Yes, anyone joining the meeting after that has started. And sometimes there's valid reasons to record a meeting, or you may have a board member that couldn't make the meeting and wants to watch that beyond minutes, might be a case. But I know that some people have concerns about their ability to just be open and transparent based on what information is being transcribed.
I think it's important that people be able to ask questions. I don't think board members ask enough questions in general at meetings. I mean, it's easy to vote yes, But asking a question before you just vote yes, for something, asking those important questions, a camera or a recording might make you feel a little less likely to,
Right.
You might feel a little dumb. I don't know. I don't want to ask that. Everyone else must know this. So I'm just going to vote yes.
Right. Good point.
And there's ways to safeguard that and use those tools, but also safeguarding the space of the boardroom for a board to have candid conversation. So
yeah, that's important. Okay, what else is on this page?
Well, under the policies section, it asks a lot of questions about do your board members sign an independence attestation? They talk about a whistleblower and a document retention policy. Those are two documents that are required through Sarbanes-Oxley, that federal law that came in, not only for publicly traded companies, but any corporation. So that includes nonprofits. And a lot of people don't realize that they're supposed to be having those. And people will ask me, well, is that for the board or is that for your employees? And the answer is yes. Both. So that's kind of interesting. And they want to know about the process for setting compensation, because when we get to the next section, we're going to talk about top staff is listed. Officers, directors, and key employees are listed as well as their salaries. And that includes, many don't understand this, but it includes the chief financial person, even if they're not an officer. They are looking, the IRS is looking for that person to be listed on page 7 with their salaries as well.
But on page 6, talk to us about the voting members. What does that mean? And what does it mean if they're different?
Well, and best practices to me, and that's at the top of page 6, there is how many voting members do you have and how many independent voting members, and they're after those numbers to be as close as possible to matching. And Charity Navigator has over the years evolved on how they evaluate that, but they want to see at least 5 members that are independent. And I've used examples over the years when we did the class that we taught, the 990. The example we used, they were not, they had five board members and only 3 of them were independent. That if you're voting and you're not independent, I would argue that is not a good practice.
So an organization is only required to have, according to the IRS, 3 board members, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
So you think best practice is at least 5?
Yes, if you have, because think about it, if you're voting and you're not independent, you're not putting the best interests of the organization ahead of your own interests. At Habitat, we have 2 homeowners that are on the board, but they're non-voting members because they lack independence, because they're a homeowner. They have a Habitat home, but they add great value and insight as participating.
I was going to say that's a reason to add someone who might not be independent, but you've also mitigated concerns there by having them as non-voting members. But the voice they add at the table helps improve program, let the board know what the experience is like, where improvement might be needed, or what's working really well.
And I think people forget there's 2 responsibilities as a board member. It's you are representing the organization, but you're also representing the community back to the organization. You wear 2 different hats. And if you have somebody on that board that can add that insight as to the stakeholders, it's invaluable.
Yes.
All right, so that wraps up page 6, part 6. I'm going to go to my number 9, most important part of the 990 to go to, and that's part 7 on page 7. And this gives the names of the officers, directors, and key employees, and it lists compensation, which for many people that like to look at 990s, they come here first. They want to know how much people made.
I do.
Yeah, there you go. And I always tell board members when it's in draft form, make sure your name's spelled correctly, because there's nothing worse than your name's your most important thing. And anytime I'd be at a board presentation presenting the draft and a board member would raise their hand and say, you misspelled my name, I felt like I had insulted them.
Yes.
So make sure all those names are spelled correctly. So this is a very critical area. How much does top staff make? And we all know how critical that is. You need good employees to make a mission work. So we've learned a lot about that over the years.
So there's been a myth that nonprofit employees should be volunteers, and that, that this whole nonprofit nonprofit overhead, salaries. And we have come a long way, but I do want to say it's important for nonprofit board members to look at these and pay their employees, a good salary. If you want someone to do a good job, you should pay them for it.
Well, and page 6 even talks about that. They want to know what your process is for setting the salary of your key employees, especially the CEO. And oftentimes they want to know, they do want to know how you go about that. But most everybody uses compensation surveys at some level to see that they're paying a comparable amount to their region, the size of their organization, and the type of organization it is. It's become critical. You can't retain good employees if they're not making a living wage.
Right.
And I see that over and over, especially in development. Employees' turnover is so high.
Yes, it is. It is. And it's hard work. Asking for money is hard work, right?
It is.
You both know that. Definitely.
All right.
So that's number 9 on the list. And then number 10, did the filer engage in what we call excess benefit transactions? And
what does that mean?
That means, did they do something that violates or regards related party transactions? And it's paying someone. What you're after is, if it's not independent, did they get paid more than they should have for what they did? So by putting it on Schedule L, which you need to move way back on the forms to find Schedule L, but it discloses anything that could have happened that raises public disclosure. So one of the questions asked earlier was, were any officers, directors, or key employees related to other officers, directors, and key employees? And that's where you would put it. Was there a loan to or from an officer, director, key employee? And oftentimes you'll see it where an officer lends money, but I've seen cases where the organization has lent money to the CEO, and that is really bizarre and should not be happening.
Might be a red flag for a donor to check out. Maybe I should donate to
that Schedule L is critical for looking at what did we do that might be construed by the public as not the best practice. But then they have the opportunity on Schedule O to explain it. And as a board member, you better be very aware of what's on Schedule L and be able to have a conversation about it.
Long ago, I worked for a nonprofit where we would do minor, very small loans to employees, but management and leadership were never eligible. They just were not. And that was part of the rules of the organization. And, something comes up here and there where an employee might need some assistance beyond what their paycheck offers, and we had a way to agree to that, but management was never eligible for loans.
Wonderful best practice.
Yes.
Definitely. So that's my top 10.
That's
so
awesome.
One other thing, though, what schedules after that could people look at? You mentioned Schedule L, Schedule O.
Those are the most important ones.
L and O.
Yeah, and what they do is Schedule B gives the major contributions, but that is public disclosure. It's redacted, so you don't see who that is. That's private. I've heard rumors that the IRS wants to change that.
Oh, wow.
And thinks that we should be putting everybody's contribution on there. That would be tough.
So nonprofits have to list any donor that contributes in that year more than $5,000. Is that right?
It's $5,000 or a particular percentage if they're a larger organization. It's a percentage of total revenue.
Okay.
So it depends on the size.
And that information is transmitted to the IRS.
Yes.
And so they see that all.
Their satellites light up and they connect.
Yes.
Did that 1040 have the same amount, or is it something different? Someday the IRS is really going to do that. Right now, they're so short-staffed in the nonprofit division that
I think one side ever talks to the other side.
Not yet.
How often do you see nonprofit organizations get audited by the IRS?
Rarely. I've never seen it.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
Just wondered what you thought.
I think they're understaffed and there's other priorities.
And I think in my time, I've never seen anything really come back on the 990. I've seen more on the payroll side for organizations, and not really an audit, but questions or clarifications that are needed. But really in organizations where I've served on the board or worked for, I've never seen questions come back about the 990 before.
And you have to wonder in the larger organizations like health systems, and health systems have separate rules around their 990 of certain things they have to submit. And I mean, there might be that's another world that I'm not involved in, but you have to wonder if maybe there's some focus there at times.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what about a independent audit that an organization pays for? When should an organization do an audit or a financial review? And when should they just file a 990 and that's it?
Well, and a financial statement audit is a different type of work. It's providing financial statements that follow generally accepted accounting principles. And it is a document that best practices has you put it on your website. And it even asks on the governance page 6 of the 990, have you had an audit done? And do you have an independent committee that oversees that audit? So that becomes a very important piece. And the other item that's of interest there is the state of Florida requires an audit for an organization that has over $1 million in revenue. An audit or a financial statement review for anyone that's $500,000 to $1 million, under $500,000 is not required. I've not really seen the state of Florida enforce that, but that is what the law is.
Because audits can be expensive, but
Yes.
they're important.
They're important, they are expensive, and it does ensure that your financials are fairly stated.
Mm-hmm.
And policies. I think a lot of what I remember going through an audit with you was that we have these policies in place that are best practices for how we manage money and
Internal controls. Yeah, very important.
Mm-hmm. I think the greatest value, though, for audits is it's really not the one time or the first time it happens, but it's that it happens consistently. And you can see patterns over time, or auditors can see patterns over time, or variations in patterns, things that are not proceeding according to plan.
Right.
So I think one of the most important things about audits is that's done consistently, that an organization just doesn't go do it because somehow, a grant required it, and then we're not going to do that next year. But it become a regular practice of what the organization does, and then reports out to through its website to its board, all of that.
I like that, and year after year, it's important because you're looking at beginning balances, and if you wait and do it every other year, it's going to continue to be costly because they have to audit the beginning balances of that balance sheet.
And I think the audit's also helpful, especially when it's accompanied on the website with the 990, because there are things in the 990 that are not well explained. They'll be on there, the number will be on there, but then when you go look at the audit, oftentimes there's more explanation, either behind the policy or practice that the organization has, or looking at why certain things happened the way they did. And so sometimes you can get much better explanation about what you're seeing in the numbers of the 990 through actually reading the audit.
Absolutely.
Well, Nancy, this has been really fun. One thing we wanted to know is of an organization in the area that we'd like to make a donation to in your honor. What organization can we do that to?
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. How about Dunedin Fine Arts Center?
Ooh, I love
Very
that.
near and dear to my heart.
Mine
It'd be
too.
wonderful.
Yeah.
We'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Do you take classes at Dunedin Fine Arts Center?
No.
So
No,
after the
but my daughters
piano
did
was done, and Nancy was done.
They were an audit client of mine, and I live in Dunedin, so they're a very dear friend in many ways.
It's
Wonderful.
a great
And
spot.
very supportive of Andrea and all that she's doing.
Yeah. It's a great team there. Well, thank you. This was so fun.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. I appreciate you both.
It's been wonderful to know you over many years and to see all the wonderful things that you've done with nonprofits, the way you've helped them as a board member. I even remember back to some of my early experiences, not when I was at PCF, but worked for an organization that was a grantee, and things that I've learned from you from presentations that you've done in the community. So it's wonderful to spend time with you and appreciate all that you do.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.